Hi there and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Capellos in Ottawa on this Monday. Tonight, big screen tariffs.
Forget about President Trump. The guy drives me crazy. Let's focus on what we can do.
Trump takes it to the movies, announcing 100% tariffs on motion pictures made outside the U.S. We'll get a progress check on Canada's tariff tactics with Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand in moments. Then, the ballooning deficit.
Ultimately, the work that we're doing today is about the sovereignty of Canada.
A more conservative-looking haircut, suit, and resume has not resulted in more conservative spending.
Another line item to tack onto Prime Minister Carney's growing deficit, hundreds of millions of dollars in tariff relief loans for Algoma Steel. Our front bench is set to break down the stakes and the opposition's take. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie are coming up. Plus, an historic apology.
And today, on behalf of the province of Saskatchewan, I apologize to you.
Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe apologizes to survivors of the Ile à la Crosse residential school, announcing a $40 million compensation agreement as Canada prepares to mark the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. That's coming up a little bit later on in the show. First, though, U.S. President Donald Trump keeps telling everyone how much he loves tariffs, but it's been a minute since he had new ones to debut. Today, though, he's coming after foreign film industries, including the one in this country, saying he'll slap 100% tariffs on movies made outside of the United States, something Ontario Premier Doug Ford quickly condemned.
Well, I disagree with anything that guy says. He drives me crazy. First of all, we built the movie business up to roughly about $3 billion. Our goal is to build it up to $5 billion. So we're going to continue growing, continue investing in the film industry.
Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand, meanwhile, addressed the United Nations this morning, laying out the Carney government's foreign policy priorities in light of a changing world. She spoke with us shortly after delivering her speech. Hi, Minister. Pleasure to welcome you back to the program. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks, Vashi.
Politico wrote this morning that after being in the room for Donald Trump's speech to the UN last night, that you recast the speech that you delivered this morning, which happened just minutes after Donald Trump announced yet another big round of tariffs. This time, 100%, he says, on movies made outside of the United States. Do you know how that will impact Canada?
Well, first, I just want to correct the record. I have been writing this speech for a number of weeks, and it is a speech that I drafted on my own. So I'm not sure the source of that particular point in this morning's article that you referred to. In terms of our approach on any particular tariff measure that the United States is adopting, we are, of course, working for the benefit of the Canadian economy. One of the points in the speech that I made at the UN General Assembly today is, in fact, about our economic resilience at home. Canada is doubling down on our multilateral relationships, not only in defense and security, but also in areas of the economy, such as the WTO. We are forging new economic partnerships with partners. I cited the trade agreement with Indonesia last week, Mexico, and further efforts in the EU, for example. So this is all hands on deck for Canada in terms of defense and security, in terms of economic resilience, as well as, of course, standing up for our core values.
Let me drill down on that, because that's sort of a focus of the speech that you delivered, right? Here are the three planks of our foreign policy,
Yes.
as we put it forth. Defense and security, as you mentioned, the second, economic resilience, and the third, core values. I want to pick up on the economic resilience part, because you gave some examples in Mexico, Indonesia, and in Europe. Your opposition at this moment in time says that you're essentially conveying something that isn't true. That in Indonesia's case, for example, that deal was actually arrived at in November of 2024, before this prime minister took office. That in Mexico, there's not anything really tangible besides an agreement saying that you want to work together more. That even in Europe, CETA is largely in place, and that there's no sort of proof of what those expanded relationships will actually mean for Canadians. Can you respond to that criticism that basically you're advertising something that isn't fully actually provable?
Actually, they're grasping at straws. Canada is the only G7 country that has a free trade agreement with every other G7 country. We have strong trade relationships. What we are doing is enhancing already existing strong trade relationships by making sure that we're leveraging our international relationships. So with Mexico, for example, the work that we are doing is to expand the scope of the relationship, to ensure that we are putting on the table Canada's competitive advantages in the area of critical minerals and energy, for example. And so work, of course, has been ongoing, but in this moment of time, what you are seeing from Prime Minister Mark Carney and our broader team is that we are doubling down on the efforts to expand our trade relationships. And that is what you will continue to see. The EU partnership is a great example. Now, as a result of that agreement, Canadian companies have the ability to compete on the same terms for EU contracts that EU businesses have. That is a difference, Vashi. Trade relationships, economic relationships among countries are complex. Canada is on a good footing, and we are enhancing our trade agreements, our economic relationships right across the board.
What, with respect, though, Minister, will those enhancements tangibly mean for Canadians? I understand the strategy imperative behind it. I think strategic imperative, I think most Canadians do, right? We have become so reliant on the United States that we have to look to become less reliant. But how soon will those efforts bear fruit for Canadians who are looking at a second quarter contraction of the economy to the tune of 1.6%? The closest country in the G7 that even, comes anywhere near that is Germany at a contraction of 0.3%. Like, we are faring worse than other countries right now.
Actually, Vashi, what you need to do in building a strong foundation and diversified trade relationships is continue to pursue those relationships, not retreat. Canada, as I said in my speech this morning, is a multilateral trading partner with many other countries. We are going to ensure that those trade agreements benefit Canadian businesses and Canadian workers. This is a time where it is not only Canada that is seeking to further diversify our trade relationships, but every country I'm speaking to here at the United Nations has similar goals, which is this is an area where we see greater protectionism and unilateralism in the global economy. Canada, for our part, will continue to work within multilateral organizations on defense and security. That's NATO and NORAD, for example. In terms of the economy, that's the WTO and individual multilateral trade agreements like CETA and like the CPTPP. These are fundamentally important to the Canadian economy as well as the global economy. And Canada will work to further enhance our leadership on the world stage as other countries retreat towards greater protectionism.
Is your government, though, being honest with Canadians about the degree to which that notion and those values and those endeavors that you just explained will actually supplant our economic relationship with the United States? To give your previous government credit, you signed a number of significant free trade deals with different regions of the world that came into effect during that 10-year period, and we still remained trading partners with the United States to the tune of 3/4 of all of our exports consistently through that decade heading to one single location. So when you talk about enhancing the relationships, the Prime Minister often says, we can give ourselves what others don't, implying that we'll be able to supplant what we lose with the United States. But the facts just don't bear that out, at all. So why not just be honest with Canadians about it?
Actually, I do not agree with your frame. This is being honest with Canadians in the sense that we have a trading relationship with the United States where 75 to 80% of current trade is covered under that agreement. When we talk about the sectors that are not covered, our government will support those sectors as we have with steel and aluminum, for example, as we have with the auto sector, for example, and we will also work to diversify our trading relationships so that there is even greater opportunity for Canadian firms and Canadian workers to benefit from multilateral trade relationships. And I want to stress that changing the composition of a trading relationship does not occur overnight. We have work to do to ensure that we're leveraging the free trade agreements that we have signed. Again, the only G7 country that has such extensive trade agreements across the board. And we'll work to ensure that Canadian businesses are cognizant of those trade relationships that already exist. But you're going to see us continue to sign additional new agreements with other partners. The EU example is just one. Indonesia is another. And of course, I'm traveling to India, Singapore, and China in a few weeks, and I'll continue to ensure that the Canadian domestic economy is on the table for greater enhancements of our domestic economy.
Do you think your government will be able to change the balance? Like when you said it's not something that can take place overnight, do you think that is ultimately possible? And what should we as Canadians, I guess, interpret from the fact that your government is not anywhere close to matching the tariffs that are in place from the United States, that you've made a cognizant decision not to hit back in a commensurate fashion, and as the opposition would accuse, be elbows down now?
Well, Vashi, you're kind of overlooking the point that I made just a second ago, which is that 75% to 80% of our trade is already still occurring under the North American Free Trade Agreement. The second point I want to say, and that in answer to your question, is yes, I do. I do believe that we will continue to be able to enhance our trade relationships with new partners, and we will be able over time to further diversify the Canadian economy. Let me give you an example of my conversation with the Foreign Minister of Pakistan. I raised the key point about canola exports that we want to ensure markets for around the world. Pakistan happens to be the third largest importer of canola in the world. We agreed as foreign ministers to continue to have this conversation at every level so as to ensure that there are other markets for Canadian farmers in the area of canola. This is just one example. Does this occur overnight? No. Does it take time? Yes. Are we ensuring that we're diversifying our economy for the benefit of Canadian businesses and farmers and workers? Absolutely. This is the time where Canadians need to see their government stepping up to diversify our trading relationships and our supply chains. And that's exactly what we're doing. That's what I spoke to at the United Nations this morning. And that is the work that all of us across the government and the Prime Minister are engaged with every day.
I'm glad, Minister, you brought up the example of canola, because we spoke with Michael Kovrig the other day, who reminded me back in 2018 when China leveraged a whole suite of tariffs on canola. The lesson to the government at the time was supposed to be to diversify markets, and instead, as a country, we just drilled down on the Chinese market, which I think informs another challenge to your government, which is that is an example of when the lesson was not heeded, and you're telling Canadians they should just trust you on face value now, and that this government, just because there's a different Prime Minister, will heed that lesson and be able to diversify. I'm not overlooking the fact that you put forward. I'm offering a challenge based on the history of the Liberals over the last 10 years, who have not been able to capitalize on those agreements and fully diversify markets.
Well, I appreciate that you're skeptical, Vashi, but when we're in these positions of leadership, we have to lead. And the key point is that in times of economic stress, we need to ensure that we're doing everything we can to benefit the Canadian economy and the Canadian workforce. And that's exactly why our diplomacy will be tied to the benefits that it can provide here at home in Canada. That is why in every conversation that I have, I am pursuing not only the defense and security of our country, but also the economic benefit that we can provide through greater diplomatic relations with a particular country to the Canadian workforce and the Canadian economy. Again, Vashi, you seem to want to have a solution overnight. What I am saying is that this takes time, but we are not letting our foot off the gas in terms of ensuring that at every turn we are advancing Canada's economic interests and Canada's leadership in multilateral fora so that we are not only benefiting the Canadian economy, but we're contributing to the growth of the global economy as well.
With respect, I certainly don't think that something can happen overnight. I think there are 80,000 people in Canada who have lost their job over the last 6 months who are hopeful that this isn't sustained. And I think that, you know, your government in the election promised to make us the most powerful economy, the strongest economy in the G7. Yes. You're the ones who set that expectation, not people who are asking questions of you.
Exactly. And the election was on April 28th, and we are here now in mid-September, and we will continue, or late September, and we will continue to ensure that there are markers of the success. For example, the agreement with Indonesia last week, the strategic agreement with the EU that was signed in June, the agreement with Mexico that we signed a couple of weeks ago. There is work happening on the ground, Vashi, and that work will continue to show benefits for the Canadian economy. This is the work we are doing to diversify trading relationships and supply chains, and we will continue to see greater advantages to Canada. At the same time, we will continue to work with the United States in terms of the trading relationship with them. This is an all-hands-on-deck moment, and I know Minister LeBlanc is working daily on that particular relationship as we seek to diversify with other trading partners and in other supply chain contexts.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Minister, appreciate your time as always. Thank you. Safe travels.
Thank you. See you later.
Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand. We've got to take a quick commercial break, but when we come back, the front bench will be here. Pierre Poilievre takes aim at food prices in the NDP leadership race, gets another candidate. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. There they are. They're back with me on the other side of a very short break. Stay right there.
Listen, this is us, I think, working together to pull out all the stops to ensure that we can save Algoma Steel and save Canadian-made steel. And ultimately, the work that we're doing today is about the sovereignty of Canada. If we don't have a thriving Canadian steel company in Canada that is producing the kinds of steel that not only foreign buyers need, but that Canadian markets need, we will not be able to reach the ambition of growing the strongest economy in the G7.
Jobs Minister Patty Hajdu there announcing a $400 million relief loan for tariff-hit Algoma Steel. The Ontario government adding another $100 million for the Sault Ste. Marie company. The demand from sectors hit by Trump's tariffs is one of the reasons the Fed say their November budget will have a, quote, substantial deficit. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is not buying what they're selling. Take a listen.
Recently, Mr. Carney appointed a parliamentary budget officer, and that budget officer is commenting on Carney's spending and his deficits and said they are, quote, very alarming, stupefying, shocking, unsustainable. If you don't change, this is done. The 5-year horizon for deficits has now doubled under Carney versus what it was under Trudeau. So a more conservative-looking haircut, suit, and resume has not resulted in more conservative spending.
Let's bring in the front bench to talk about that. With me tonight, former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant. He's the CEO now of Space Canada. Former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt is with us. She's the Vice Chair and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC. CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is with us, as is the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Rob Benzie. Hi, everybody. Happy Monday. Good to see you.
Hey, Vashti.
Brian, I'll start with you. I found it interesting today that, in particular, behind the scenes, the government was really conveying, hey, this loan we announced today is an example of why the deficit will be a larger number than we originally thought. They're trying, I think, attempting to lay some groundwork to try and put forward a case for that. The leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, was asked about things like that and came back with, condemnation, basically, whatever the reason is for a bigger deficit. And as you heard him say, you're not really a conservative prime minister, even though you've been characterized as such. What do you think of the way that those arguments are bearing out?
Yeah, so I mean, no surprise that the government's going to lay the groundwork for whatever is going to be in the budget. In this case, it looks like some of the things they're worried about or that they want to flag with Canadians before they actually introduce the budget is indeed the deficit. And they are, as you mentioned, trying to link it to things that they hope people would support and saying these are some of the reasons why we may have a larger deficit than we would like. And in terms of Poilievre's tack, I think it's the right approach, obviously, from his point of view, to say, to try to lay his groundwork and say that this is going to be a real problem, whatever the deficit is, right? He's obviously going to try to say that this is all mismanagement on Carney's front. Carney and co will probably, I would argue, look, we just got here, give us some time. We're acting boldly on major projects, trying to get revenue in, trying to get the economy going. We're going to be asking departments to come with proposals to cut up as high as up to 15% of expenditures, which one can certainly argue that you can't necessarily do that in budget one, but you get those ideas, and over time you can, with a few budgets, try to get to that number or close to that number for some departments. So I think there's going to be a bit of a game of trying to explain and lay the groundwork before the budget. Ultimately, when people see the budget, the deficit is definitely going to be the thing that we probably all chat about, especially given Carney kind of came in with this idea that he would be fiscally more focused than the Trudeau. So a lot of groundwork to lay, and the proof will be in the pudding.
Sorry about that. You cut out for a moment. Tom, I'll swing over, just jump off that point and ask you, because we've talked on a number of occasions on this panel specifically about the politics of deficits, right? Like how much do people care? You obviously have, very intimate experience with that. The context has definitely changed over the last 10 years. Is the argument around mismanagement easier to land with someone like Justin Trudeau than Mark Carney, or is there a potential vulnerability for the Carney government because of what Brian just laid out, that Mark Carney did position himself so clearly during the election as a manager, a competent manager of the economy?
Yeah, no question that was a main selling point for Mr. Carney during the campaign, but I think that Canadians still hang their hats on that. Canadians are still looking at him as the person who can stand up to Trump, deal with the budgetary situation, and they know that there was already a massive deficit projected in the 60 billion range, so it might grow to 70 or 90 billion. They know that that's a possibility, and they also know that even though it is a bit self-serving to say, oh, Algoma Steel, here's a check for $500 million from Ontario and the feds, and that's why we're running up this deficit. People see through that, but they also know that it's necessary. Because if you don't have these big industries, and if they all fail because of the short-term effect of these Trump tariffs, then Canada is the loser long-term. I think that's the big difference. When you're in opposition, you fire at this stuff. I've always believed, and I understood your reference to be about that. I've always believed that governments should not take in more than what they need and shouldn't spend more than what's necessary for the programs that are essential for people. But that last part has changed radically. So we're not only talking about the government programs that we've known about in the past, but the government has to step up to the plate now and help companies like Algoma Steel. Otherwise, again, long-term, we'll be losers. So we've got to get past the Trump phase. It is temporary. It'll be a couple of years. He's already going to be a lame duck in a year. So that'll all change rapidly. But for now, we're very vulnerable, and Canadians understand that.
I imagine, Lisa, that the government, like Brian and Tom both pointed out, will tie the deficit to things like the announcement today or other supports necessary because, in their view, of what's happening with Donald Trump. Does that, do you think, inform or change the Conservative rebuttal at all? Or do you imagine that it stays very much like deficit bad no matter what?
Well, I think that what the Conservatives will attempt to do, and I hope they do, is try to give a little context around it. At the very beginning in 2015, the Liberals said we're going into a deficit because now is the time to invest. Money is cheap and we can do this. And then we went into deficit because it was COVID and they have your back and Canada has to make sure they come out of the pandemic. And now we're faced with yet another crisis, absolutely, but now we have to spend even more. And the key for the Conservatives is to try to get Canadians to think about deficits in the light of, you feel the pain right now in the economy, it's because they've run deficits for the past 10 years. You can argue with me about whether or not that's a true fact, but that is the connectivity between what the Conservatives are saying right now with respect to spending and deficits and what they want Canadians to remember, that a big deficit is actually going to be problematic for them in the short, medium, and long term. But I will say, lastly, I'm in the Port of Montreal today talking to shippers about how the economy is and what the impact of the U.S. tariffs are. And it is absolutely factual that there are problems in the steel industry, that there's problems in the aluminum industry. Shipping is down 50%, 60% in some cases. This is a very real crisis. It's unfortunate, though, that the Liberals have spent the last 10 years talking about deficits as being something that they're allowed to do and there's no impact. And now they really have to do it. And they have to argue with Conservatives that there's not going to be an impact again.
In a way, though, Benzie, both parties have a similar task, like boiling down their argument to how it will impact people, right? In the case of the Liberals, if they want to justify a deficit, they have to explain, like, here are the reasons why this actually will help you and help the country, or mostly you, in this crisis. If the Conservatives, as I understand Lisa's point, want to punch through on the deficit, it's going to have to be like, here is what that big number actually means for your life in the future.
And it's tough, Vashi. I mean, here in Ontario, the progressive Conservative government has been running big deficits its whole 7-8 years in office. And voters haven't punished them for that because they're seeing investments in things that they want. And I think this is the challenge. Now, Lisa's not wrong. Mark Carney was an electoral unicorn who promised everyone a pony for Christmas. Well, Christmas is coming, and we're all looking for Santa. So the budget is going to have to make some difficult choices, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what those choices look like. If the deficits are as big as the parliamentary budget officer is guesstimating, then that's a problem, I guess, for the guy who was the fiscal manager. But I don't know if people don't want program cuts. That's the tough problem for Mr. Poilievre. He can say government needs to be leaner and meaner, and then you say, okay, well, what would you cut? Where are the choices you're going to make? They always say, oh, we're going to find efficiencies. We're going to cut consultants. It's never the major things that Canadians notice. They're not saying we're going to do what Jean Chrétien did in the 1990s. We're going to cut transfers for health care to the provinces, and that's going to lead to cuts at the provincial government. Tories won't do that federally, neither will the Liberals. So I'm not sure anyone really wants to make the difficult decisions.
There's going to be efficiencies. Everyone tells me. Come on, Rob. If everyone's going to find efficiencies, and we're going to get there. I got to take a quick break. The entire panel is back. After that break, we'll take a deeper dive into the race to replace Jagmeet Singh to lead the NDP. There's a new candidate, Heather McPherson, who announced officially she's in over the weekend, and another one coming later this week. We're back to talk about that.
And the NDP needs a leader that is ready now, ready to hold the government accountable in the House of Commons, ready to organize and campaign across this country to welcome more people to our table, and ready to win. Today I stand in front of you and I say I'm honored to say my name is Heather McPherson, and I am running to be the next leader of Canada's New Democratic Party.
Edmonton MP Heather McPherson there launching her campaign to lead the NDP this weekend. The party is set to elect a new leader in March who will be tasked with rebuilding the NDP, which was reduced to just a handful of seats in the spring election. Also in the race so far, activist and filmmaker Avi Lewis and union leader Rob Ashton, who says he'll officially launch his campaign Wednesday in Toronto. So how is the field shaping up? Let's bring back our front bench. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie are here. Tom, of course, as a former leader of the party, I'll start with you. If there is sort of a way to characterize the race thus far based on who we know has actually said that they're running, what would you describe it as?
I would say that the person who just launched over the weekend, Heather McPherson, has the inside track. She has so many people backing her within the party apparatus. And I'll start with a simple explanation that was given to me at the start of this exercise after Mr. Singh left his position as leader. It was essentially, we have to go back to Alexa McDonough, the last time we had a woman leader who was elected full-time. Of course, Nicole Turmel did the interim after Jack's death, but it was the last time we had somebody full-time was, of course, Alexa McDonough. So they felt strongly that it was time to have a woman leader, and a lot of the younger people in the NDP that I know have been working on that. A lot of the older hands in the NDP have simply decided that it is going to be Heather McPherson, so they're pushing hard for that. There is, of course, one thing she has in common with Avi Lewis is no French. And if you can't do a debate in French, much less an interview on Tout le monde en parle, you're going to be in trouble in Quebec. And it was such a hard job that Jack Layton and I did to try to break through in Quebec. And it was that spectacular orange wave in 2011. But even before that, Vashi, we were starting to get votes. We were starting to get noticed. The ideas of the NDP really coincided with the ideas of a lot of Quebecers. That would be entirely lost if you had a person who couldn't speak the language. And Heather McPherson has a lot of capabilities. She's a very good communicator, but she in different interviews, she said, well, letting us know that she has a daughter who probably is in French school or in immersion. She said, my daughter's going to help me learn some French. And that's nice. And she even did her launch at the Francophone Center in Edmonton. But, she's been there for years. She's had access to the very best French lessons for free, unlimited access as a member of parliament. And it wasn't a priority for her until now. And unfortunately for her, she can't speak French. Nor can Lewis. And Lewis has been out in BC for a while. He's tried a couple of times to get himself elected. It hasn't gone well. And that's the biggest problem and the challenge that he's got, because if you want to be the leader of a party, you better show that you know how to get yourself elected. Jack Layton got himself elected after being elected leader. He got himself elected as an MP, and he got others elected with him. And I did the same thing. I won an implausible victory for the NDP in a by-election in Quebec. And then I became the first person to win a seat in Quebec for the NDP in a general election. So you have to be able to show that you can do that part of it. Mr. Lewis has a very good background as a filmmaker. He's a smart guy. And of course, his wife, Naomi Klein, is an absolute, demigod of the left around the world, not just in Canada. But I don't know if that's going to get him to first base with the members of the NDP. We'll see. I don't know Mr. Ashton. I'm told that he's a very strong union leader who has a lot of people who really like his approach. I mean, he'd be that person. And I think he would help reaffirm the cred of the NDP with working people, because the Conservatives have been doing a pretty darn good job of eating into that pie.
Benzie, what's your read on the crop so far?
Look, the NDP's at 8% in the polls, Vashi. If they were serious about being a government in waiting, Tom would still be the leader, frankly, because I think, as Tom mentioned, Avi Lewis, who is my age, so he's not a young guy, but I think there's an image of him as a young guy because he used to be on a VJ on Much Music and things like that. I'm not sure the son of Stephen Lewis, former provincial NDP leader here in Ontario, and the grandson of David Lewis, I think who was the first federal NDP leader. He's got really good family connections. But I don't know. Is it a Nepo baby situation for the NDP? I don't know. I think Tom's right. Heather McPherson is already elected. The only thing is that all of these candidates so far seem really fixated on some issues that I'm not sure are going to be the most important issues with the workers in Algoma Steel who are worried about their jobs. They're very concerned, and rightly so, about Gaza and the war in between Israel and Hamas. But I'm not sure that is the mainstream issue for most Canadians at a tough time when we're in a trade war with the United States. It's a fashionable issue among certain folks, and it's an important one. I understand that, but is it the voting issue? I don't believe it is.
What do you think, Lisa, is the most fertile ground right now for the NDP to mine?
Well, I think the area that Rob Ashton's going to go after, and that is unionized labor. I mean, the ground has pretty much been ceded to the Conservatives in some areas, the Liberals in others. Look, the way I look at it is that Heather was part of the government. Well, they were part of the government, weren't they? They did that agreement with Justin Trudeau. So she can't really run away from that. She is the establishment. Avi is very much an activist, and you're going to see that coming out for sure in the way in which he speaks. And the person who's going to be entering on October 1, Rob Ashton, who I had not worked with, he came to the ILWU after I left as Minister of Labour. But I hear good things about him as well, to pick up on what Tom said. But that's somebody who can speak very clearly on behalf of Labour, who is very clearly involved in an incredibly important economic sector, which is impacted by tariffs in this country. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he has to say, quite frankly, and whether or not that's going to get Conservatives to think, okay, well, what am I going to say now? Because we clearly have somebody who has those union chops who's going to be entering into the race. So I'm hoping to see more debate and more discussion coming out of the end. I think we have a race. I think, and of course, I would like to finish by saying they should draft Mulcair.
That'll be the new banner on our panel. So we can't lose a panelist. Come on, Brian. Last word to you. Your read on what you see so far.
You mean on Tom running again? Is that what you're? Sorry.
Yeah.
So
yes
look,
or no? Yeah.
From my point of view, I would agree with what my colleague said so far. I would simply say, when you are where you are with the NDP right now, 7 seats, sort of really just battling to be relevant. I don't know if the leadership race, as it's shaping up, is going to be able to garnish the attention they would need. And that's not easy, and it's not to the fault necessarily to those that have raised their hands to run. Often to get that type of notoriety, that type of attention, you need really something that is almost like a lightning rod. And let's go back to when the Liberals were in 3rd place and Justin Trudeau ran it. Had Justin Trudeau not run and got all the attention that he got for various reasons, I'm not sure things would have ended up the way that they did. Also, it wasn't the case in when Trudeau ran for his leadership, but I also think the idea that somebody is able to sort of garnish that attention is challenged by having too many candidates too, right? If it's a race of 2 or 3 people and there's somebody that's really saying some outlandish things that are maybe landing with some people in the country, or there's a star candidate, whatever it might be, if there's only a few of them. But if it's sort of just people that have maybe a little bit of a segment of the country they're after, or the party they're after, and there's going to be 4 or 5 of them, I'm just not sure it's the kind of race that the NDP needs to be able to get the attention that it needs to rebuild at this stage.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the discussion. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie, our wonderful Monday front bench. We'll take a quick break. Still ahead, gun control advocates spent decades advocating for the gun bans and buyback program in the headlines last week. Now the program and the minister in charge of it are being questioned. Heidi Ratjen, who survived the Polytechnique massacre, will be my next guest with her perspective after a short break.
The minister says it's a bad idea, but they're only doing it for political reasons. Why is the Prime Minister putting lives at risk for politics?
The person who's putting lives at risk is the leader of the opposition who's voted against every single piece of gun legislation.
Will the Prime Minister stop wasting money banning gopher guns, read his briefing notes so that he knows what he's talking about, and fire that incompetent minister?
What this government is doing is providing fair compensation for Canadians to return illegal firearms.
Days of debate on Parliament Hill last week after leaked audio showed Public Safety Minister Gary Anandasangri telling a constituent he didn't think his own government was getting it right on the banned gun buyback program that he's overseeing, sparking debate on the minister's commitment to the policy. What do advocates who fought for tougher gun control in this country think of that debate? Heidi Ratjen is a survivor of the Polytechnique Montreal massacre and a representative, with Police se souvient. Ms. Ratjen, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for making the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So we played part of the debate that ensued over the buyback program itself and obviously included the minister's comments. I wanted to ask you, though, why, in your view, that program is an important tool for the government?
Well, I don't think it's important for the government. I think it's important for Canadians. Poll after poll over the years has consistently showed that around 80% of Canadians want to ban assault weapons like the AR-15, semi-automatic, military-style weapons that are commonly used in mass shootings. And so this is about public safety, and it's also about democracy, because we've been waiting for this measure for so many years. And we have a Liberal government, maybe a different one than the Trudeau government, but the Liberal government has been elected 4 times in a row on a promise to ban assault weapons. And no matter what the difficulties are and the challenges and all the politics around it, the fact remains is that this is a public safety measure, and it's supported by most Canadians, and we deserve to have it, have this promise fulfilled quickly and effectively. That's what Mark Carney promised, that he would do things differently, because certainly this file has been the subject of much mismanagement and delays and lack of rigor. And so now we are counting on Carney to make sure that his minister gets it right.
The criticism that was levied last week toward the government over this program specifically was kind of, if I could sum it up or paraphrase it, was kind of like, you know, these aren't the weapons that you have to worry about. You should be more focused on the border, for example, where we know there are, you know, illegal weapons that are being used in these gun crimes, or other measures that might be more effective. How would you respond to that? And what is it that you think will be effective about this program?
Well, first of all, gun crime, there's all kinds of situations where guns are misused. And gun control is more than about one measure. Like banning assault weapons targets one specific misuse of guns, which is mass shootings. And nobody's ever said that banning assault weapons will solve the illegal handgun issue. What needs to be understood, though, is that the gun lobby and the conservative governments are going around quoting 80% of gun crime is committed with illegal handguns, for example. That is not true. The 80 or 90% applies to handguns only and urban crime only. And it's true that in places like Toronto, 80% of gun crime is committed with illegal handguns. However, across the country, these are RCMP numbers. They did a study over 4 years of guns seized in crime. Most are domestically sourced, 73%, and most are long guns. Now, it's not our position to pit one type of gun crime against another. We say we can battle all kinds of misuse of guns through various measures, and one doesn't prevent another. But if we want to prevent mass shootings, where most of the time in Canada and the United States, the mass shooter is the legal owner of the guns used. This was the case at Polytechnique, at Dawson, at the Quebec Mosque, numerous times when police officers were shot, including 3 in Moncton, 3 RCMP officers. They're shot with legal assault weapons. So banning assault weapons is the first thing to do if we don't want to go down the road of the United States, where they have a mass shooting every single day.
There's also another gun that your group is advocating go on that list of banned weapons, the SKS. The government has said it's reviewing that ask, but has also in various statements that I've read pointed to, for example, Indigenous use as something that it has to consider. What in your estimation is the case for putting this on that list?
Well, we totally recognize that the SKS is a very particular case because number one, it's inarguably an assault weapon. It was designed for the Soviet Army for the Second World War. Second of all, it is also commonly used for hunting because at some point after the war, they dumped a whole, thousands of these surplus models onto the Canadian market very cheap. So that's probably the reason why it was they always kind of delayed dealing with the SKS, and it's not part of the ban, which is otherwise we feel comprehensive. So that's why we proposed a compromise. At the very least, ban new sales of SKS so that new assault weapons don't come on the market. And then we'll deal with those that exist. We propose to at least remove from circulation modern versions, which are very different than those that were produced before the Second World War, which gun experts and gun enthusiasts, they call them quasi-AR-14s. These have to be removed from circulation. And for the older versions, we're okay with having a special exemption where they can remain in circulation in the hands of their owners. In other words, be subject to grandfather clauses. Now, these proposals we had communicated to the government a long time ago, and unfortunately, the important thing, and I think for most taxpayers who support the buyback is like me. We want gun owners to be compensated fairly. That's part of the whole ban on assault weapons. But we don't want our money to be used by a gun owner who just surrendered their assault weapon to turn around to buy a new assault weapon, that would mean that hundreds of millions of our taxpayer money will end up in the coffers of the gun industry, and we'll still have a market with a huge loophole, which will allow assault weapons to continue to come on the market, because the SKS is it's very special, it's a very versatile weapon on which many different versions can be built. And so the market will adapt, and we'll have Canada will be full of SKS assault weapons, as opposed to having a comprehensive ban and our taxpayer money used judiciously to as an investment. It's a lot of money. Of course, we concede that. It's a lot of money, but it's an investment in our future to make sure Canada doesn't go down the road of the United States in terms of mass shootings.
I'm going to leave it on that note. Ms. Rathjen, thanks so much for making time for the conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you again for having me.
Of course, Heidi Rathjen is with Polly Sous-Souvien. We'll take a quick break. We're back with more after that break. Welcome back to Power Play. Saskatchewan's Premier Scott Moe officially apologized today for the government's role in the abuse and trauma that occurred at a residential school that operated in that province for more than 100 years.
These schools were a mistake, and they shouldn't have existed. Today, we acknowledge the role of the province of Saskatchewan and previous Saskatchewan governments in the operation of the Isle Cross School until 1970s, into the 70s. And today, on behalf of the province of Saskatchewan, I apologize to you.
Saskatchewan has agreed to pay more than $40 million to former students of Ile à la Crosse and their families. The school operated north of Saskatoon from the 1860s until the 1970s. Survivors say they were banned from speaking their language and would be beaten if they did, which resulted in a loss of their culture and identity. Tomorrow, of course, we will have special coverage marking the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. That coverage will be all day here on CTV News Channel. That includes a special ceremony being held here in Ottawa. You can watch Remembering the Children live tomorrow beginning at 3 o'clock Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific. Again, right here on CTV News Channel. We'll have much more coverage of what to look ahead to for that tomorrow throughout the evening tonight. Lots more reaction, of course, to Donald Trump's latest threat of tariffs as well. I will leave Power Play there. I'm Vashi Kapelos. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful evening.